Have you ever wondered what secrets lie hidden behind the walls of a school at night? Shioma had always been a quiet, diligent girl. She was the kind of student every teacher wanted in their class. Always on time, books neatly arranged, and a mind eager to learn. But even the brightest stars can find themselves surrounded by darkness. Her secondary school, Hopewell Girls Academy, stood tall and imposing, its gates painted in fading green, with a massive tree near the main building. The students called it Iroko of Silence because for as long as anyone could remember, no birds chirped on its branches. Some said the tree had been there before the school was built. Others whispered that it was sacred. Shioma didn't believe in such stories. They're just tales to scare us, she often told her bunkmate, Amina, who was her opposite in many ways, talkative, curious, and always eager to share gossip. But one night, as the Harmattan breeze swept through the dormitory, something changed. "Chioma, did you hear that?" Amina whispered, sitting upright on her bunk. The other girls were fast asleep, their steady breathing filling the room. "Hear what?" Chioma asked, pulling her blanket closer. "That sound like chanting." Chioma rolled her eyes. "Amina, please sleep. It's probably someone snoring." But Amina wasn't convinced. "No, Chioma, I've been hearing it for days now. It always comes from behind the dining hall." That caught Chioma's attention. Behind the dining hall? At this time of night? What would anyone be doing there? Amina leaned closer. "That's what I'm saying. We need to check it out." "Check what out? Are you mad? You want to be expelled?" Chioma hissed, but her voice trembled slightly. Amina smirked. "What if there's a secret party? You know senior girls always have their own thing." Chioma shook her head. "This isn't about parties. Something feels off." She couldn't explain it, but a strange unease settled in her chest. But Amina wasn't one to let things go. The next night, she woke Chioma again. "Chioma, I'm going. Whether you follow me or not, that's your business." Chioma groaned, but something told her not to let Amina go alone. Reluctantly, she slipped out of bed and followed her friend, their footsteps light on the cold dormitory floor. As they approached the dining hall, the sound became clearer, a low rhythmic chant, like voices calling out to something unseen. "Do you hear it now?" Amina whispered, her eyes wide with excitement and fear. Chioma nodded, her heart pounding. They crept closer, peeking through a crack in the wooden shutters. What they saw made Chioma's blood run cold. A group of students, dressed in white wrappers, stood in a circle under the moonlight. In the center was a clay pot with smoke rising from it. One of the senior girls held a staff, her voice leading the chant. "What is this?" Chioma whispered, barely able to breathe. Amina grabbed her hand. "I told you, Chioma, something is happening here." Chioma wanted to leave, but her feet felt glued to the spot. The air around them felt heavy, as if the very ground beneath the school was alive, pulsing with a strange energy. Suddenly, one of the girls turned towards the window, her eyes locking onto theirs. "Run!" Chioma hissed, grabbing Amina's arm. They sprinted back to the dormitory, their breaths ragged, hearts racing. As they reached their bunks, Chioma turned to Amina. "We can't tell anyone about this." "But Chioma, no." Chioma's voice was firm. "We'll pretend we didn't see anything. Do you understand?" Amina nodded reluctantly, but Chioma knew her friend. This wasn't over, and deep down, Chioma feared that whatever they had stumbled upon was just the beginning. The next morning, Chioma tried to go about her day as if nothing had happened. She focused on her lessons, copied her notes diligently, and avoided looking at Amina, who seemed too eager to discuss the previous night's events. But even as Chioma buried herself in her books, her mind wandered back to what they had seen. The chanting, the white wrappers, the clay pot. It was like something out of an old folktale her grandmother used to tell by the fire. "Chioma, are you even listening?" Chioma snapped back to the present. Amina was leaning over her desk, her face filled with frustration. "What?" "I said we need to go back tonight. Are you mad?" Chioma hissed, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. They were in the dining hall, eating lunch. Plates of jollof rice and plantains sat before them, but Chioma had barely touched her food. "Think about it," Amina said in a low voice. "Why would they be doing something like that at night?" "Don't you want to know the truth?" "No, I don't," Chioma snapped. "And you shouldn't either. Amina, this is dangerous. What if they catch us? Or worse? She didn't finish the sentence, but the unspoken fear hung in the air. Amina sighed, poking at her food with her fork. Fine, but I can't stop thinking about it. Something's not right with this school, Chioma. I've felt it since we resumed this term. Chioma didn't respond. She wanted to dismiss Amina's words as paranoia, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that her friend was right. Later that evening, Chioma decided to visit the chapel. It wasn't something she did often, but tonight, she needed peace. The small building sat at the edge of the school compound, its wooden doors slightly ajar. As she stepped inside, the familiar smell of old wood and candle wax greeted her. The room was empty, except for Mrs. Nyoku, the elderly chapel mistress, who was arranging hymnals at the altar. "Chioma, my dear, what brings you here?" Mrs. Nyoku asked, her kind eyes sparkling behind her glasses. I wanted to pray," Chioma said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Nyoku nodded, gesturing for Chioma to sit. "The chapel is always open. Take your time." Chioma knelt down, clasping her hands together. "God, please help me," she murmured. "I don't know what's happening, but I feel like something bad is coming. Protect us and show me what to do." As she finished her prayer, a strange noise echoed through the chapel, a faint rustling, like leaves brushing against each other. Chioma froze, her heart racing. She turned to look at Mrs. Njoku, but the woman didn't seem to hear it. "Did you hear that?" Chioma asked, her voice trembling. "Hear what, my dear?" Chioma shook her head. "Nothing. It's probably just the wind." But as she left the chapel, the feeling of unease only grew stronger. That night, Chioma lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. The dormitory was silent, except for the occasional creak of the wooden beds. Amina was fast asleep, her soft snores filling the room. Chioma closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep. But just as she was about to drift off, a faint sound reached her ears. The same chanting they had heard the night before. Her eyes flew open. She turned to Amina, shaking her awake. "Amina, it's happening again." Amina groaned, rubbing her eyes. "What are you talking about?" "The chanting. Listen." Amina sat up, her ears straining. The sound was faint but unmistakable, like a distant echo. "This is our chance," Amina whispered, already climbing out of bed. Chioma hesitated, fear gripping her chest. "What if they catch us?" "They won't," Amina said confidently. "We'll be careful." Against her better judgment, Chioma followed Amina once again. This time, the chanting led them deeper into the school compound, past the dining hall and towards the old science block, a section of the school that had been abandoned for years. The building loomed before them, its windows shattered and walls covered in creeping vines. The chanting grew louder as they approached, sending shivers down Chioma's spine. "Are you sure about this?" Chioma whispered. Amina nodded, her face set with determination. "We have to know the truth." They crept closer, peeking through a gap in the door. Inside, they saw the same group of students, their white wrappers glowing eerily in the moonlight. But this time, the ritual seemed more intense. The leader, holding the staff, was chanting louder, her voice rising and falling like a wave. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Chioma grabbed Amina's arm, her eyes wide with fear. "What's happening?" Chioma whispered. "I don't know," Amina replied, her voice shaking. Before they could move, the leader turned towards the door, her eyes blazing with an unnatural light. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice echoing like 1,000 whispers. Chioma and Amina screamed, stumbling back into the shadows. Chioma and Amina didn't stop running until they were safely back in their dormitory. Their hearts pounded as if trying to escape their chests, and they struggled to catch their breaths. "What was that?" Amina whispered, her voice laced with panic. "Did you see her eyes?" Chioma nodded, sinking onto her bed. "Amina, I told you this was a bad idea. Now they know we've seen them." Amina paced the room, her hands clutching her head. "This is serious, Chioma. That wasn't just some ordinary ritual. There's something unnatural going on." Before Chioma could respond, the dormitory door creaked open. Both girls froze, their eyes darting to the shadowy figure standing in the doorway. It was Mrs. Njoku, the chapel mistress. Her expression was calm, but her presence felt heavy, as though she carried the weight of 1,000 secrets. "Girls," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." Amina and Chioma exchanged nervous glances. Slowly, they followed Mrs. Joku to the chapel. The air outside was cold, and the faint sound of crickets filled the night. When they reached the chapel, Mrs. Njoku lit a lantern, casting flickering shadows on the walls. She gestured for them to sit. "I know what you've seen," she began, her voice steady. "And I know you have questions." Chioma and Amina nodded, too afraid to speak. Mrs. Joku took a deep breath. This school was built on sacred land, a place where the ancestors once worshipped and made sacrifices. Long before the school existed, this ground was used for rituals to connect with the spirits of the earth. "Spirits?" Amina whispered, her eyes wide. "Yes," Mrs. Njoku said, "but not all spirits are kind. Some demand more than offerings of food and drink. Some crave power, control over those who dare to disturb their slumber." Chioma's voice trembled as she asked, "What does that have to do with the students? With us?" Mrs. Njoku's gaze darkened. "The school founders made a pact with these spirits to ensure the school's success. In return, the spirits demanded periodic rituals to keep them appeased. Over time, those rituals became twisted." Amina leaned forward, her curiosity overcoming her fear. "So the students we saw, are they part of this pact?" Mrs. Joku nodded gravely. "Some of them, yes. They've been lured into it, either by fear or promises of power and protection. But they don't understand the true cost." Chioma's mind raced. Why hasn't anyone stopped this? The principal, the teachers, surely they know. Mrs. Her eyes blazing with determination. "We'll do it, right, Chioma?" Chioma glanced down at the "Spirits?" Amina whispered, her eyes wide. "Yes," Mrs. Njoku said, "but not all spirits are kind. Some demand more than offerings of food and drink. Some crave power, control over those who dare to disturb their slumber." Chioma's voice trembled as she asked, "What does that have to do with the students? With us?" Mrs. Njoku's gaze darkened. "The school founders made a pact with these spirits to ensure the school's success. In return, the spirits demanded periodic rituals to keep them appeased. Over time, those rituals became twisted." Amina leaned forward, her curiosity overcoming her fear. "So the students we saw, are they part of this pact?" Mrs. Joku nodded gravely. "Some of them, yes. They've been lured into it, either by fear or promises of power and protection. But they don't understand the true cost." Chioma's mind raced. Why hasn't anyone stopped this? The principal, the teachers, surely they know. Mrs. Joku sighed. "Many of the staff are complicit. Some turn a blind eye out of fear, while others are directly involved. I've tried to intervene, but my influence only goes so far." Amina clenched her fists. "We can't just sit here and do nothing. Chioma, we have to do something." "What can we do?" Chioma asked, her voice rising. "We're just students. If they find out we know, they'll come after us." Mrs. Joku placed a reassuring hand on Chioma's shoulder. "You're right to be cautious, but you also have a choice. You can stay silent and hope for the best, or you can fight back and expose the truth." "But how?" Amina asked, her determination flickering. Mrs. Joku reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, intricately carved amulet. It shimmered faintly in the dim light of the chapel. "This belonged to the original guardians of this land," she explained. "It's said to hold the power to weaken the spirit's influence, but it must be used wisely." Chioma hesitated before reaching out and taking the amulet. It felt warm in her hand, as if alive. The carving seemed to hum softly, resonating with an unseen energy. "What do we do with it?" Chioma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You must place it at the heart of the ritual site," Mrs. Njoku said. "Where the altar stands, the place you saw tonight. The amulet will disrupt their connection to the spirits. But be warned, it won't be easy. They will sense your presence and try to stop you." Amina leaned forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "We'll do it, right, Chioma?" Chioma glanced down at the amulet, then back at Mrs. Njoku. Her mind was racing with doubt and fear, but deep inside, a spark of courage flickered. Finally, she nodded. "We'll try." Mrs. Njoku placed a hand on Chioma's shoulder, her touch steady and comforting. "Be brave, my dear girls, and remember, faith is your strongest weapon." No matter what you face, hold on to it. As they left the chapel, the weight of their mission pressed heavily on their shoulders. The night seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with tension. Back in their dormitory, Chioma and Amina sat together, their resolve solidifying with every passing moment. They knew the risks, but they also knew they couldn't turn back now. Tomorrow night, Amina whispered, her voice steady but low. We end this. Chioma tightened her grip on the amulet, her heart pounding with equal parts fear and determination. Tomorrow night. The air was thick with anticipation as the night fell. Chioma and Amina stood by the window in their dormitory, watching the stars above. There was something different about the night, something that made their skin crawl. This is it, Amina said, breaking the silence. We're really doing this. Chioma nodded, her mind racing. She couldn't stop thinking about the ritual site, the place where the darkness had taken root all those years ago. It was hard to shake the feeling that something malevolent was waiting for them, lurking in the shadows. Are we sure about this? Chioma asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. What if we're making things worse? Amina's eyes were filled with unwavering determination. We have to try. Think about all the other students who don't even determination. We have to try. Think about all the other students who don't even know what's going on. We can't let them suffer because of some ancient pact. Chioma didn't say anything, but she could see the truth in Amina's words. They had to fight for something bigger than themselves, something that would protect the generations to come. The clock on the wall ticked closer to midnight. The campus was quiet, almost too quiet. The only sound was the distant rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. It's time, Chioma said, her voice now steady. Amina nodded, her face grim. Let's go. They made their way to the chapel, the place where they would begin their dangerous mission. The amulet burned softly in Chioma's pocket, as if urging her forward. When they reached the chapel, they crept inside, careful not to make a sound. The place was as still as the grave, but Chioma could feel it, the energy that pulsed through the air, dark and heavy, as if the land itself was watching them. This is it, Amina whispered, glancing around nervously. Chioma nodded and took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She walked toward the altar, the place where the rituals had been carried out. The walls seemed to close in on her as she approached, the flickering light casting eerie shadows. You have to place the amulet right in the center of the altar, Mrs. Njoku had said. Only there can it disrupt their connection to the spirits. Chioma knelt in front of the altar, her hands shaking as she took the amulet out of her pocket. The moment she touched it to the stone surface, a sudden, sharp chill ran through the air. Amina gasped, Chioma, something's wrong. The ground beneath them trembled, and the lanterns in the chapel flickered violently. The sound of chanting rose from nowhere, low and ominous, echoing through the walls. We have to leave, Amina cried, but it was too late. The door slammed shut with a deafening crash, trapping them inside. The chanting grew louder, and Chioma could feel the presence of something dark, something ancient, growing stronger with each passing second. What's happening? Chioma whispered, her voice trembling. A figure appeared at the far end of the chapel, cloaked in shadows. It was tall, its features hidden by a dark hood. You should not have come here, a voice rumbled, deep and cold. It wasn't a voice that belonged to any human. Chioma's heart pounded in her chest. Who are you? She demanded, trying to sound brave. The figure stepped forward, and the air around it seemed to shimmer with unnatural energy. I am the guardian of this place. You have disturbed the ritual, and now you must pay the price. Amina's eyes widened with fear. What do you want from us? The guardian's voice was filled with an eerie calm. The price is your soul. Chioma's grip tightened on the amulet, and she stepped forward, her voice shaking but firm. We won't let you have us. We'll fight back. The figure laughed, a sound that sent chills down their spines. Fight back? You cannot fight what has existed for centuries. But Chioma didn't back down. She held the amulet high, its warm glow growing stronger. I will not let you take anyone else, not on my watch. The ground trembled again, and the air crackled with power. The guardian raised its hand, summoning a dark force to crush them. But just as the power was about to strike, the amulet flared with light, forcing the dark energy back. "No," the guardian screamed. "You cannot destroy what has already been claimed." The light from the amulet expanded, engulfing the chapel in a brilliant glow. The guardian howled in fury, but its form began to fade, like smoke in the wind. With one final burst of light, the chapel fell silent. The air cleared, and the oppressive weight lifted. Shioma and Amina stood breathless but alive. The amulet's glow faded, and the world around them seemed to return to normal. The chanting stopped. The door opened. "We did it," Amina whispered, her voice trembling. Shioma could hardly believe it. They had succeeded. But as they walked out of the chapel, she couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't seen the last of the spirits guarding the school. And yet, for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. The next morning, Chioma woke up feeling different. The weight of the events from the night before still clung to her. But it was a feeling of relief, mixed with normal. The chanting stopped. The door opened. "We did it," Amina whispered, her voice trembling. Shioma could hardly believe it. They had succeeded. But as they walked out of the chapel, she couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't seen the last of the spirits guarding the school. And yet, for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. The next morning, Chioma woke up feeling different. The weight of the events from the night before still clung to her. But it was a feeling of relief, mixed with confusion. Her mind raced as she tried to process everything that had happened. She glanced around the dormitory. Amina was still fast asleep, her chest rising and falling in the quiet rhythm of sleep. Chioma slipped out of bed and walked to the window, staring out at the campus below. It looked so peaceful, so normal, but she knew better now. Beneath its serene exterior, there were secrets buried deep within the earth. Secrets that had shaped the history of the school and its students. Her fingers grazed the amulet in her pocket, its smooth surface a reminder of the power they had faced the night before. The ritual was over, but Chioma knew that the true battle was just beginning. The memories of the Guardian's words haunted her. "You cannot destroy what has already been claimed." "Claimed," she whispered, feeling a chill run down her spine. "What does that mean?" Amina stirred, waking up. She stretched lazily before glancing over at Chioma, her eyes still filled with the remnants of sleep. "What's wrong?" she asked, sensing the unease in Chioma's tone. Chioma turned to her friend, trying to sound calm. "I keep thinking about the Guardian. It said something about the ritual being claimed. What if it wasn't just about the land? What if it's about something else? Something more?" Amina sat up, her face serious. "You think it's connected to the school's history?" "I've been hearing whispers from the older students about strange things happening here long before we arrived." Chioma's mind flashed back to the stories the teachers had told them about the founding of the school, how it had been built on sacred land. But what if that wasn't the whole story? What if the land wasn't just special because of its history, but because it had powers beyond comprehension? "I think we need to learn more about the land, the real history. Something tells me that the Guardian wasn't just a spirit protecting the ritual. It was something more." Chioma's voice trailed off as an idea began to form in her mind. Amina raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Chioma's eyes narrowed, her voice growing more determined. "I think the Guardian was a warning. The ritual, the dark powers, it all connects to the land itself. We need to go back, find out what really happened here, and stop it once and for all." Amina looked hesitant, but Chioma could see the fire in her eyes. "I'm with you," she said quietly. "But where do we even start?" Chioma paused, her mind racing. There was only one place that could hold the answers: the school's ancient records. The records were kept in a small, secluded library deep within the campus, far from the prying eyes of the students. Only the teachers and administrators had access to it, and it was said that the records contained details of the school's founding including information about the land and the rituals that had been performed over the centuries. "We need to get into that library," Chioma said with certainty. "It's our only chance." Later that afternoon, Chioma and Amina made their way toward the library. The school was bustling with students, some heading to classes, others hanging out in groups. It was easy to blend in with the crowd, and Chioma felt a sense of calm as they walked together, side by side. But deep down, she knew that what they were about to do could change everything. They reached the library, and Chioma's heart skipped a beat as she saw the imposing stone building in front of them. The doors were closed, and a sign hung on the wall, indicating that it was only open to staff members. This was it, the place where the answers lay. Chioma glanced around to make sure no one was watching before pulling out the amulet from her pocket. The glow was faint, almost imperceptible, but Chioma could feel the heat of it in her palm. She pressed it against the stone door, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then there was a soft click. The door swung open with ease. Chioma and Amina exchanged surprised glances. "How did that?" Amina began, but Chioma quickly hushed her. "No time for questions. Let's go," Chioma whispered, stepping inside. The library was dark, the shelves lined with dusty old books. The musty smell of aged paper filled the air, and the silence was almost suffocating. Chioma felt the weight of the place, as though it held centuries of secrets waiting to be uncovered. They moved deeper into the library, past rows and rows of ancient tomes until they reached a small desk at the far end of the room. Behind the desk was a locked cabinet, its surface scratched and worn from years of use. "This is it," Chioma said, her voice filled with awe. "The records are in there." Amina stepped forward, examining the lock. "Do you have the key?" she asked. Chioma shook her head. "We don't need one." Chioma pressed the amulet against the lock again, her breath held tight in her chest. For a moment, nothing happened. She held it there, the amulet warm against her palm. Then, with a soft click, the lock gave way, and the cabinet door creaked open. Chioma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her heart racing. Amina stared at her in disbelief. "How did that?" Amina whispered, her voice barely audible. Chioma quickly shushed her. "No time to wonder. We have to move fast." They stepped forward into the dim light of the cabinet. Rows upon rows of ancient, dusty books lined the shelves, some with cracked leather covers, others yellowed with age. It smelled like old paper and forgotten stories. Chioma's fingers trembled as she reached for the closest book, pulling it out and flipping it open. The pages were worn, but the ink was still clear. Her eyes scanned the words, the old writing giving her a strange sense of awe. It was a history she had never heard before. Stories of the school's founding, the powerful land it was built on, and the rituals that had been performed in its very grounds. Rituals that were tied to the land itself and to something far darker than she had imagined. She flipped to a section that detailed the land's power, how it had once been a sacred site for ancient rites. The rituals had been meant to protect, to maintain balance, but the last entry, scrawled hastily, made her stomach drop. "Beware the curse of the land. Disturb not the spirits, for they shall claim your soul, bound to the darkness forever." Chioma's hands shook as she closed the book, her mind racing. The words were like a warning, but they made no sense. The ritual, the guardian, the power that had risen last night, it was all connected to this. Amina, who had been silently reading over her shoulder, whispered, "Chioma, this is bigger than we thought. The land, it's alive." Chioma closed her eyes, trying to process it all. Alive? The guardian's warning came rushing back to her. You cannot destroy what has already been claimed. Was this the meaning? Was the land itself cursed, and the rituals just the beginning? "We have to stop this," Chioma whispered, more to herself than to Amina. "We need to know how to break the curse." Amina nodded, her eyes dark with understanding. "Let's find out everything we can before it's too late." Chioma stood up, her mind set. There was more to this place than she had ever imagined. And if she and Amina didn't act quickly, the consequences would be far worse than they could have ever imagined. She slid the book back into its spot and turned to leave, but as she reached the door, she felt a strange sensation, a coldness creeping over her skin. Her body stiffened, and she looked over her shoulder. For a brief moment, she thought she saw something move in the corner of the library, something watching them. Her heart skipped a beat, but when she turned to look again, there was nothing there. Just the empty shelves, the dust, and the silence. She hurried out, Amina following close behind. As they made their way back to the dorm, Chioma couldn't shake the feeling that the land, the spirit, was watching them, waiting for them to make the next move. As the night grew darker, the heavy silence of the school felt like a thick, suffocating fog. Chioma and Amina made their way back to their dormitory. But Chioma couldn't shake the feeling that something was following them, lurking just behind the before it's too late. Chioma stood up, her mind set. There was more to this place than she had ever imagined. And if she and Amina didn't act quickly, the consequences would be far worse than they could have ever imagined. She slid the book back into its spot and turned to leave, but as she reached the door, she felt a strange sensation, a cold waiting for the right moment to strike. Every time she glanced over her shoulder, there was nothing, but the sensation lingered. Waiting for the right moment to strike. Every time she glanced over her shoulder, there was nothing, but the sensation lingered, a prickling on the back of her neck that told her she wasn't alone. "Do you think they know?" Amina asked quietly as they passed the empty hallways. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, as though speaking louder might alert something in the darkness. Chioma didn't answer immediately. She was lost in thought, still turning the contents of the book in her mind. The land alive, the rituals, the curse. Her thoughts were swirling like a storm, each one more frightening than the last. "I don't know," she replied finally, her voice low and tense. "But whatever this is, it's not something we can ignore. It's been here longer than we've known." Amina nodded solemnly. The two of them reached the dormitory and slipped into the room, careful not to wake the others. The clock on the wall showed that it was well past midnight. Chioma sat down on her bed, pulling the dusty book from her bag once more. The eerie words from the final chapter kept replaying in her mind, echoing in her thoughts. "Disturb not the spirits." The warning was clear, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized they had already disturbed something. They had already awakened something deep beneath the earth. The land itself. Amina paced nervously, her eyes darting to the dark corners of the room. What do we do now? We can't just go back to our normal lives after what we've learned. It's too dangerous. Chioma felt a pang of doubt in her chest. She had been so sure earlier, but now, faced with the enormity of it all, she felt small. She hadn't signed up for this kind of fight. She was just a student, trying to graduate. But that same fire that had driven her to investigate couldn't let her turn away now. "We need to talk to Miss. She knows more. She has to." Amina shot her a confused look. "But we can't just walk up to her." "Shall I know?" Chioma interrupted. "But we have to try. If she's involved in this, maybe she's the only one who can help us stop it before it gets worse." The two girls shared a long look, and Amina finally nodded. "All right, we'll do it. But we have to be careful. We can't let anyone else find out what we're doing. If we're caught, everything we've learned will be for nothing." Chioma agreed. The next morning, they would make their move. But as they prepared to leave for bed, Chioma noticed something strange. The air in the room had grown unnaturally cold. She pulled the blanket up tighter around her shoulders. But the chill seemed to settle deep in her bones. Amina too noticed it. Her eyes widened in fear, and she looked around the room. "Chioma, do you feel that?" Before Chioma could answer, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then they went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. "Chioma?" Amina's voice cracked with fear. Chioma's heart was racing now, her eyes straining in the dark. She felt the room close in on her, the walls pressing down like an invisible weight. The air smelled thick like earth after rain. It was the smell of ancient things, of power that shouldn't have been disturbed. Then there was a sound, a faint whisper, like the rustling of leaves. Chioma's breath caught in her throat. What was that? She turned her head toward the door. For a second, she thought she saw a shadow moving just outside the room. Amina took a step back. "Chioma, I don't like this." Chioma reached for her phone, praying the screen would light up, but it was dead, completely drained, even though she had charged it earlier that night. "Chioma," Amina whispered again, her voice trembling. "What if we're not alone?" The door creaked, and then slowly it opened. And standing there, silhouetted by the faint moonlight, was Miss, but there was something different about her. Her eyes, usually kind and calm, were now dark and hollow, as if drained of all warmth. She stepped into the room, and the cold seemed to follow her, seeping into every corner. "Miss Sujoku?" Chioma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The teacher didn't respond immediately. She stood there for a long moment, staring at them with an unsettling intensity. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she spoke. "You should have stayed away. Now, you've awakened something that can't be undone." The words felt like a heavy weight on Chioma's chest. It was as though the air itself had thickened, pressing in from all sides. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "Miss Sujoku?" Chioma tried again, her voice shaking. "What do you mean? What's going on?" But before she could say anything more, the teacher raised her hand. A dark mist swirled around her fingers, and the room grew colder still. "Don't ask questions you're not ready to hear the answers to." Chioma's heart thudded in her chest, and for a moment, everything around her seemed to slow down. The air felt thick with something ancient, something powerful, like the ground beneath them was alive, watching them, waiting for something. Miss Chioma could feel the temperature drop further until her breath came out in visible puffs. The mist around the teacher's hand seemed to move of its own accord, swirling like a dark cloud. Amina was shaking beside her, her face pale with fear. "Miss Sujoku, please?" Chioma started, but her voice wavered, uncertain. The teacher's lips curled into a cold smile. "You've heard the stories, haven't you? The ones about this school, about the land it was built on. You thought they were just old tales, didn't you?" Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a sense of finality. Chioma's mind raced. The stories. She had heard them growing up, rumors passed down in whispers, legends of spirits that haunted the land. They were just that, stories, nothing more. But now, standing before Miss, it all felt far too real. This place, they have watched over it, controlled it for centuries, and now because of you. She gestured to Chioma and Amina. "Because of your curiosity, you have disturbed them." Chioma could barely breathe. Amina opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Instead, there was only the faint sound of wind howling outside the dormitory windows, as if the earth itself was protesting their presence. "Why are you doing this?" Chioma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're a teacher. You're supposed to help us, not this." "I never wanted to, Chioma. I never wanted to be part of this either. But it's too late for that now. Once the ritual begins, it cannot be stopped." Chioma felt a cold sweat forming on her brow. The ritual, she had read about it in the book, but hearing it spoken aloud in this terrifying context made it all the more real. There was no turning back now. You are caught in a web. A web spun long ago when the land was first claimed by those who came before us. They made a pact with the spirits, one that kept the land safe, kept the people safe. But the price was high. There are sacrifices that must be made, and now it is your turn. Chioma recoiled, feeling a wave of nausea wash over her. "Sacrifices? What do you mean by that?" "Blood, Miss. The ritual requires blood to keep the land and the spirits at peace. Your blood, and now you've awakened them. There's no escaping it." Chioma's mind was spinning. blood, her heart raced, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly helpless. She thought about the sacrifices, the legends of students who disappeared, the stories she'd heard but never believed. It was all real, and she was in the middle of it. Amina stepped forward, her voice trembling. We can't just let you do this. There has to be another way. There is no other way. The land demands its due. It's always been this way. Amina took Chioma's hand, pulling her back. We can't let this happen. There must be something we can do. We need to stop her. Chioma nodded, trying to steady her breath. They couldn't just give in. There had to be a way out. But her mind was racing, desperately trying to find a solution, a way to break the curse that had been placed on this land so long ago. As she searched for an answer, she remembered the amulet, the one missed there. She felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the key to stopping this nightmare lay in that amulet. What if? Chioma began, her voice trembling but gaining strength. What if we return the amulet? What if we undo what was done? You think returning the amulet will undo centuries of power? It's not that simple, Chioma. The spirits do not forget. But Chioma didn't give up. Maybe we don't have to undo it. Maybe we just need to stop the ritual before it's too late. Amina squeezed her hand. We'll fight. We won't give up. Miss, you cannot fight what you cannot see. The spirits are already upon you. Suddenly, the room seemed to shake, and Chioma felt the ground beneath her feet rumble. It was as though the very earth was alive, reacting to the words spoken. Chioma's mind raced. The spirits are here. Before she could process what was happening, a cold, dark figure appeared at the edge of the room. It was tall, shrouded in shadow, its eyes glowing like embers in the dark. The figure stretched its hand toward her, and Chioma felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Chioma! Amina screamed, pulling her back. We need to run. But Chioma couldn't move. The figure's presence froze her in place, paralyzed by fear. Now you will understand. Now you will see what happens when the land is disturbed. The cold figure stood there, its shadow stretching like an endless dark veil. Chioma's heart was pounding in her chest, and every part of her body screamed to run, but she couldn't move. It was as though the figure had wrapped its fingers around her very soul, holding her in place. Amina was still clutching her hand, her grip tight and desperate. Chioma, please, she cried out, her voice breaking, but Chioma couldn't answer. She was staring at the dark figure, feeling a strange pull, as if it was calling her, beckoning her closer. The glowing eyes bored into hers, cold and unfeeling. Then the figure spoke. The voice wasn't human. It was a deep, echoing sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The time has come, child. You have awakened what should have remained asleep. Chioma felt a cold sweat form on her forehead, her mind racing. This was what the stories had warned about. This was the spirit that had been waiting for the right moment to return. The one that demanded its sacrifice. And now, that moment had come. But as the figure advanced, something inside Chioma stirred. A strength she hadn't known was there. She had always been strong, but this felt different. It was as if the very land beneath her feet was giving her power, lending her its strength to fight back. You are not the only one with power here, Chioma said, her voice surprisingly steady, even though fear gripped her heart. I won't let you take anyone. The figure paused, its glowing eyes narrowing. You are brave, child, but bravery will not save you. Chioma shook her head. I don't need saving. I need to protect my friends. And I will. The ground beneath her feet trembled again, but this time it was different. The energy in the room shifted. Chioma could feel it in the air, like a sudden change in the wind before a storm. She didn't know what it was, but she knew it was her chance. Chioma, don't! Amina screamed, but Chioma wasn't listening. She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing against the smooth, cold surface of the amulet. The amulet that had once unlocked the door to the hidden room. The amulet that was now the key to stopping everything. Without thinking, she pulled it out and held it high, facing the dark figure with every ounce of courage. You are not the only one with power here, Chioma said, her voice surprisingly steady, even though fear gripped her heart. I won't let you take anyone. The figure paused, its glowing eyes narrowing. You are brave, child, but bravery will not save you. Chioma shook her head. I don't need saving. I need to protect my friends. And I will. The ground beneath her feet trembled again, but this time it was different. The energy in the room shifted. Chioma could feel it in the air, like a sudden change in the wind before a storm. She didn't know what it was, but she knew it was her chance. "Chioma, don't!" Amina screamed, but Chioma wasn't listening. She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing against the smooth, cold surface of the amulet. The amulet that had once unlocked the door to the hidden room. The amulet that was now the key to stopping everything. Without thinking, she pulled it out and held it high, facing the dark figure with every ounce of courage she could muster. "Leave us alone," she shouted, her voice filled with a force she didn't even know she had. "I won't let this school fall to your curse." The figure's laughter echoed in the room, hollow and empty. "You think you can stop me with a trinket? It is too late for you, child. Too late for all of you." But Chioma refused to back down. She pressed the amulet against the floor, feeling its energy pulse beneath her fingertips. The ground trembled again, but this time the energy was different, warmer, brighter. Something was changing. Suddenly, a flash of light erupted from the amulet, blinding them all. Chioma felt herself thrown backward, her body crashing into the wall behind her. The room spun, her vision blurred. She could hear Amina's voice calling her name, but it sounded distant, as if it were coming from the other side of a thick fog. When the light finally faded, Chioma slowly opened her eyes. The dark figure was gone. The cold presence that had filled the room was no longer there. The air felt lighter, almost peaceful, as if the weight of the curse had been lifted. Amina was kneeling beside her, her face pale but relieved. "Chioma, you did it. You stopped it." Chioma could barely speak. She was exhausted, her body aching from the struggle. But deep inside, there was a feeling of victory, of peace. It was over. The ritual had been stopped, and the spirits had been sent back to where they belonged. But just as Chioma began to relax, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "You may have stopped them, Chioma, but the battle is not over. Miss, you cannot fight the land forever." Chioma's heart skipped a beat. Was it really over? Or had she just won a small victory in a war that was far from finished? The room was silent for a moment, and then, "Miss, this school will always be bound to the spirits of the land. You cannot change that, but for now you have earned a reprieve." Chioma stood, her legs trembling beneath her. "A reprieve is all we need, and we'll keep fighting. We won't let this happen again. Miss, we shall see indeed." With that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Chioma and Amina standing in the silence. Chioma looked at Amina, her heart heavy but hopeful. "We've won this fight, but there's more to be done. We have to protect everyone else here. We can't let this school fall back into the same darkness." Amina nodded. "We won't let them. We'll make sure the truth comes out. No one else should have to go through this." The two girls shared a determined look. They had faced the spirits of the land and survived. But Chioma knew that their journey was far from over. As the days passed, Chioma couldn't shake the feeling that the school wasn't as peaceful as it seemed. The curse had been lifted, yes, but there was something still lingering in the air, a quiet tension, like the calm before another storm. The students went about their daily lives, but Chioma couldn't help but notice the subtle changes. The way some of them would glance over their shoulders, as though afraid someone or something was watching them. The strange whispers that seemed to float through the halls late at night, just out of reach of her understanding. And then, of course, there was Miss. Chioma couldn't forget the words Miss, and why had she said it with such certainty? Late one evening, as Chioma sat in her room with Amina, she found herself staring out the window, deep in thought. "You're still thinking about it, aren't you?" Amina asked, her voice breaking through Chioma's thoughts. Chioma sighed, rubbing her forehead. "I can't help it. Something's not right. The amulet worked, but I feel like there's more to this, something we don't understand yet." Amina nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking the same thing. The rituals, they were tied to the school's history, right? But it's like we only scratched the surface. There's so much more beneath the surface." Chioma's heart skipped a beat. "You think the school is still connected to the spirits?" Amina didn't reply immediately, but Chioma could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "I don't know. but I can't shake the feeling that we haven't heard the last of them. Chioma frowned, turning back to the window. I won't let them take anyone else, not after everything we've been through. The next day, Chioma and Amina decided to meet with Miss. They needed answers, and they couldn't wait any longer. As they walked through the hallways, they could feel the weight of the air, thick with unspoken secrets. There were rumors, whispers of strange happenings, things that couldn't be explained, but no one was willing to talk openly about it. When they finally found Miss, "We need to know more," she said, her voice firm. "What else is happening here? What aren't you telling us?" "Miss, you are persistent, Chioma. I will give you that." "We need to understand what we're up against," Amina added, her voice trembling slightly. "The curse, it's not over, is it?" Her back was turned to them, but they could still hear her voice, low and filled with a quiet sadness. "This school is built on sacred land," she began. "It has always been tied to the spirits of the land. The rituals were meant to keep them at bay, to keep the balance, but that balance has been broken. The spirits have awakened, and now they are restless." Chioma and Amina exchanged a glance, their hearts racing. "You're saying the curse isn't just a curse?" Chioma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Miss, no, Chioma, it was never just a curse. It is the spirit of the land itself, demanding its due. The rituals were meant to protect the students, to keep them safe. But when the land is disturbed, when the rituals are no longer followed, the spirits return, and they do not forget." Chioma felt a cold shiver run down her spine. But the amulet, it stopped them. For now, but the power of the spirits is ancient. It cannot be stopped by a simple trinket. It will take more than that to keep them at bay. Amina's voice was shaky as she asked, "What do we do now? How can we stop it for good?" "The answer lies in the land itself. You must understand its history, its power. Only then can you protect yourselves and the school from what is coming." Chioma felt a mix of dread and determination wash over her. She had thought the battle was over, but now she knew that it was only just beginning. The spirits of the land were not finished with them, and they were not going to stop until their demands were met. "We'll do whatever it takes," Chioma said, her voice strong. "We'll learn the truth. We'll protect this school and everyone in it." "Miss, then you must be prepared. The spirits will not go quietly, and neither should you." With that, she turned away, her figure blending into the shadows of the office. Chioma and Amina stood there for a moment, the weight of their task sinking in. But Chioma wasn't afraid. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to stop now. Whatever was coming next, she would face it head-on. And this time, she wouldn't be alone. The following days were filled with a heavy sense of urgency. Chioma, Amina, and Miss. But with each meeting, the weight of the knowledge they were uncovering grew heavier. The spirits of the land, the power of the rituals, they were all part of something much larger, something beyond their understanding. The girls spent their days digging through old books, ancient manuscripts, and records that had been stored in the school's archives for decades. Each document they uncovered revealed more about the school's dark history, the land on which it was built, the ancestral spirits that had once been worshipped, and the rituals that had been passed down through generations. It was as though the more they learned, the more questions they had. Why had the school been built on this land in the first place? What had happened to the people who had once lived here? And why had the spirits been disturbed? "Miss, you must understand the rituals, the customs of the land, and the ancestors' teachings," she had said. "Without that, the spirits will not listen to you. They will not heed your call." But even as they learned more, Chioma felt a sense of dread. She had never been one to believe in spirits or ancient forces, but now, with everything that had happened, she couldn't deny that something was out there. Something powerful, something dangerous. One night, as Chioma sat alone in her room, she felt an unsettling chill in the air. The window was cracked open, and the wind seemed to whisper her name. She shivered, pulling the blankets tighter around her, but the chill didn't go away. It lingered like a shadow. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. But when she opened them, she saw something that made her heart stop. In the corner of her room, just beyond the light of the lamp, there was a figure, a tall, shadowy figure standing motionless. Its face was obscured by darkness, but Chioma could feel its eyes on her. The figure stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Chioma froze, unable to move, as if the very air around her had thickened. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure didn't speak. Instead, it reached out, its hand glowing faintly with an eerie, greenish light. Chioma's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Suddenly, the figure was gone. Chioma blinked, unsure if she had imagined it. But the air was still thick with an unnatural presence. She could feel it, a force pressing in on her, like something was just waiting to break through. Her mind raced. Was this one of the spirits had they come for her? Or was this something else, something darker? She didn't know. All she knew was that the danger wasn't over. It wasn't even close to over. The next day, she and Amina met with Miss. "We need to prepare for what's coming," Chioma said urgently. I saw something last night, a figure, in my room. I don't know if it was a spirit or something else, but it wasn't human. Miss, the spirits are restless. But they are not the only force at work here. Something has awakened, something older, something more powerful. Chioma's blood ran cold. What do you mean? There is a force beneath this land that predates even the spirits. It is not something you can fight with rituals or amulets. It is an ancient power, a force of nature, and it has been disturbed, and now it wants something in return. Chioma felt the weight of those words sink into her chest. What does it want? Instead, she reached into a drawer and pulled out an old weathered map. This is the land the school is built on, and this, she pointed to a spot on the map, is where the power lies. It is ancient, and it is not something that can be controlled by anyone, not even the spirits. Chioma stared at the map, her heart racing. What do we do now? Miss, you must return to the source. The power is tied to the land, and only by understanding its true nature can you hope to contain it. It was as though the more they learned, the more questions they had. Why had the school been built on this land in the first place? What had happened to the people who had once lived here? And why had the spirits been disturbed? Miss, you must understand the rituals, the customs of the land, and the ancestors' teachings, she had said. Without that, the spirits will not listen to you. They will not heed your call. But even as they learned more, Chioma felt a sense of dread. She had never been one to believe in spirits or ancient forces, but now, with everything that had happened, she couldn't deny that something was out there. Something powerful, something dangerous. One night, as Chioma sat alone in her room, she felt an unsettling chill in the air. The window was cracked open, and the wind seemed to whisper her name. She shivered, pulling the blankets tighter around her, but the chill didn't go away. It lingered like a shadow. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. But when she opened them, she saw something that made her heart stop. In the corner of her room, just beyond the light of the lamp, there was a figure, a tall, shadowy figure standing motionless. Its face was obscured by darkness, but Chioma could feel its eyes on her. The figure stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Chioma froze, unable to move, as if the very air around her had thickened. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure didn't speak. Instead, it reached out, its hand glowing faintly with an eerie, greenish light. Chioma's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Suddenly, the figure was gone. Chioma blinked, unsure if she had imagined it. But the air was still thick with an unnatural presence. She could feel it, a force pressing in on her, like something was just waiting to break through. Her mind raced. Was this one of the spirits had they come for her? Or was this something else, something darker? She didn't know. All she knew was that the danger wasn't over. It wasn't even close to over. The next day, she and Amina met with Miss. "We need to prepare for what's coming," Chioma said urgently. I saw something last night, a figure, in my room. I don't know if it was a spirit or something else, but it wasn't human. Miss, the spirits are restless. But they are not the only force at work here. Something has awakened, something older, something more powerful. Chioma's blood ran cold. What do you mean? There is a force beneath this land that predates even the spirits. It is not something you can fight with rituals or amulets. It is an ancient power, a force of nature, and it has been disturbed, and now it wants something in return. Shioma felt the weight of those words sink into her chest. What does it want? Instead, she reached into a drawer and pulled out an old weathered map. This is the land the school is built on, and this, she pointed to a spot on the map, is where the power lies. It is ancient, and it is not something that can be controlled by anyone, not even the spirits. Shioma stared at the map, her heart racing. What do we do now, Miss? You must return to the source. The power is tied to the land, and only by understanding its true nature can you hope to contain it. But be warned, this is not a journey to be taken lightly. Amina swallowed hard. Are we ready for this? Shioma nodded, her mind made up. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to stop now. Whatever was waiting for them, she would face it head-on. We'll do whatever it takes, Shioma said firmly. We have to stop this for everyone, for the school, for the land. Miss, then prepare yourselves. The path you're about to take will be dangerous. But if you're truly ready, then go. But know this, you may not come back the same. Shioma and Amina exchanged a determined look. They were ready. Whatever it took, they would find a way to stop the ancient power, even if it meant sacrificing everything. The days leading up to their journey were filled with tense preparation. Shioma, Amina, and Miss, every piece of the puzzle had to fit together perfectly if they hoped to survive. The air around the school felt heavier, charged with an energy Shioma couldn't explain. It was as if the entire land was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The students and teachers went about their daily routines, unaware of the dark forces at play beneath their feet. One evening, as they sat together in Miss, Shioma could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her. Tonight is the night, Miss. We must be ready for whatever comes. Shioma nodded. Amina's expression was hard to read. Her usual optimism had been replaced by a quiet, determined focus. The fear was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, but it had become part of their resolve. Together, they made their way. She had never been one to believe in spirits or ancient forces, but now, with everything that had happened, she couldn't deny that something was out there. Something powerful, something dangerous. One night, as Shioma sat alone in her room, she felt an unsettling chill in the air. The window was cracked open, and the wind seemed to whisper her name. She shivered, pulling the blankets tighter around her, but the chill didn't go away. It lingered like a shadow. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. But when she opened them, she saw something that made her heart stop. In the corner of her room, just beyond the light of the lamp, there was a figure, a tall, shadowy figure standing motionless. Its face was obscured by darkness, but Shioma could feel its eyes on her. The figure stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Shioma froze, unable to move, as if the very air around her had thickened. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure didn't speak. Instead, it reached out, its hand glowing faintly with an eerie, greenish light. Shioma's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Suddenly, the figure was gone. Shioma blinked, unsure if she had imagined it. But the air was still thick with an unnatural presence. She could feel it, a force pressing in on her, like something was just waiting to break through. Her mind raced. Was this one of the spirits, Miss? Had they come for her? Or was this something else? Something darker? She didn't know. All she knew was that the danger wasn't over. It wasn't even close to over. The next day, she and Amina met with Miss. We need to prepare for. Or was this something else? Something darker? She didn't know. All she knew was that the danger wasn't over. It wasn't even close to over. The next day, she and Amina met with Miss. We need to prepare for what's coming, Shioma said urgently. I saw something last night, a figure, in my room. I don't know if it was a spirit or something else, but it wasn't human. Miss, the spirits are restless, but they are not the only force at work here. Something has awakened, something older, something more powerful. Chioma's blood ran cold. What do you mean? There is a force beneath this land that predates even the spirits. It is not something you can fight with rituals or amulets. It is an ancient power, a force of nature, and it has been disturbed, and now it wants something in return. Shioma felt the weight of those words sink into her chest. What does it want? Instead, she reached into a drawer and pulled out an old weathered map. This is the land the school is built on. And this, she pointed to a spot on the map, is where the power lies. It is ancient, and it is not something that can be controlled by anyone, not even the spirits. Shioma stared at the map, her heart racing. What do we do now? Miss, you must return to the source. The power is tied to the land, and only by understanding its true nature can you hope to contain it. But be warned, this is not a journey to be taken lightly. Amina swallowed hard. Are we ready for this? Shioma nodded, her mind made up. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to stop now. Whatever was waiting for them, she would face it head-on. We'll do whatever it takes, Shioma said firmly. We have to stop this, for everyone, for the school, for the land. Miss, then prepare yourselves. The path you're about to take will be dangerous. But if you're truly ready, then go. But know this, you may not come back the same. Shioma and Amina exchanged a determined look. They were ready. Whatever it took, they would find a way to stop the ancient power, even if it meant sacrificing everything. The days leading up to their journey were filled with tense preparation. Shioma, Amina, and Miss, every piece of the puzzle had to fit together perfectly if they hoped to survive. The air around the school felt heavier, charged with an energy Shioma couldn't explain. It was as if the entire land was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The students and teachers went about their daily routines, unaware of the dark forces at play beneath their feet. One evening, as they sat together in Miss, Shioma could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her. Tonight is the night, Miss. We must be ready for whatever comes. Shioma nodded. Amina's expression was hard to read. Her usual optimism had been replaced by a quiet, determined focus. The fear was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, but it had become part of their resolve. Together, they made their way to the spot on the map, the place Miss. It was a secluded part of the school grounds, far from the main buildings, and tucked away in the overgrown woods that surrounded the campus. The air here was thick with an unnatural silence, as if the very earth had gone still in anticipation. As they approached the clearing, Shioma felt a shiver run down her spine. The ground beneath their feet seemed to hum with an energy that sent her heart racing. She could feel the presence of something ancient, something that had been waiting for them. This is it, Amina whispered, her voice trembling. Miss, this is where it all began. The spirits are tied to this place, but the real power lies beneath. Without another word, she knelt down and placed her hand on the earth. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground beneath them. Shioma felt a strange pull, a force urging her to step closer, to understand what lay below. Suddenly, the ground trembled. A loud cracking sound split the silence, and the earth beneath them began to shift. Shioma gasped as a large stone doorway emerged from the ground, covered in intricate symbols and carvings that seemed to pulse with energy. This is the entrance, Miss. This is where the power lies. They approached the door, their footsteps slow and cautious. Shioma felt a surge of fear, but knew they had no choice. She was ready to face whatever awaited them. They had come this far. There was no turning back now. Miss, with a low rumble, the door creaked open, revealing a dark tunnel that seemed to stretch infinitely into the earth. We must enter. This is where the ritual must be completed. Shioma and Amina exchanged a glance. This was it. They were standing on the threshold of something far beyond their comprehension. But they were ready to face it together. With a deep breath, Shioma stepped forward, followed closely by Amina. The darkness of the tunnel swallowed them whole, and the air grew colder with each step. The further they descended, the stronger the feeling that something was watching them, waiting for them. As they reached the bottom of the tunnel, they entered a vast chamber, an underground sanctuary, ancient and sacred. The walls were lined with carvings, each telling the story of the land, of the spirits, and of the forgotten rituals that had once been performed here. In the center of the room stood a large stone altar, and above it hovered a swirling vortex of energy. It was the source, the heart of the power they had been seeking. "This is it, miss. We must disrupt the flow of energy. Only then can we stop it from consuming the school." But as she stepped forward, a voice echoed through the chamber, a deep, resonant voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You have disturbed my slumber," the voice boomed. "Why have you awakened me?" Chioma froze. The presence they had felt earlier was now unmistakable. The power beneath the school was alive, and it was speaking to them. "We didn't mean to disturb you," Chioma said, her voice trembling but firm. "We only wanted to stop the harm you're causing. The school, the students, they're in danger." The voice laughed, a low, rumbling sound that filled the chamber. "Danger? You are the danger. You have awakened something that cannot be controlled." Suddenly, the vortex above the altar grew stronger, the energy swirling violently. The walls of the chamber began to crack, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. "We must stop it now." Without hesitation, Chioma and Amina moved toward the altar. "Miss," the energy around them pulsed, threatening to break free. Chioma felt the force of the power pressing down on her, but she didn't falter. She reached out, touching the altar, and as she did, a blinding light erupted from the center of the vortex. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. A deafening crash, the vortex collapsed in on itself, the power vanishing into the air. The ground stopped trembling, and the walls of the chamber fell silent. Chioma looked around, her heart still pounding. It was over. They had done it. The power was gone. But as they made their way back up the tunnel, the air felt lighter, freer. The spirits, the land, and the power beneath it had been calmed. For now, Chioma didn't know what the future would hold. Chioma had learned something important. The forces of nature, the spirits of the land, and the powers of the past were not to be ignored. They had to be respected, understood, and honored. As they ascended from the depths of the tunnel, the atmosphere around them felt different, lighter, almost as if a weight had been lifted from the land. The trees, once burdened with an eerie stillness, now seemed to breathe with a renewed life. The school, too, felt less oppressive, its dark secrets now buried beneath layers of knowledge and respect. When they returned to the surface, Chioma could feel the difference in the air, like the world had exhaled a breath it had been holding for centuries. The journey had been harrowing, but it had shaped her into someone more aware, someone more attuned to the balance that must be maintained. "Miss, the land will heal, but we must remember there is always a price for awakening ancient forces." Chioma nodded, the weight of her responsibility settling in. She had seen the consequences of meddling with things beyond human understanding, and she knew that the school and its students were forever changed by what had happened. "I won't forget," Chioma said, her voice firm, "but I'll make sure that it's respected from now on. We all need to learn the lesson of balance." Amina, who had been silent throughout the journey, finally spoke. "We've done something important, Chioma, something bigger than ourselves." Chioma smiled at her friend, her heart full. "Yes, Amina, and it's something we will never forget." As they left the sacred ground and walked back to the school, Chioma felt a quiet sense of closure. But she also knew that the lessons they had learned would stay with them forever, guiding them as they moved forward in life, always mindful of the power of the past and the importance of respect. In the end, it wasn't just the school that had been saved. It was the balance between the present and the past, between the seen and the unseen, that had been restored.